Hey, it's Posey Gloves here, and today we're going to be looking at balance in a mix. So balance becomes a lot more interesting of a topic. I mean, before it was already a pretty interesting topic, like we mixed a small tune. But when you get into a bigger tune, it becomes a little more difficult to do because what was important over here may still be going on over here, but maybe just become less important. Maybe other things are going on, such as, vocals. And being able to change this as you're moving along to guide the listener through your track to say, hey, here's something that's really important. And then instead of just poof, it's gone, you have to sort of say it's still there, but it's a little bit less important than this thing over here. So they're looking at this thing, and then maybe it goes down and a third thing comes up, and then it goes down again. Like there's this dance. And something that happens in a lot of beginner mixes is they say, here's a thing, here's another thing, here's another thing. And it becomes really difficult to understand which thing is the thing I'm supposed to be paying attention to. It's not that listeners are dumb. It's just that your song doesn't flow. A good speech is going to emphasize particular themes, and they're going to say words with different inflections that are going to draw your attention to see what the listener wants, or maybe the listener's trying to deceive you, which in music, you are trying to get them to perceive what you want them to perceive. So I guess you could look at it as sort of a big magic trick as well. So I have this plug at the beginning, and the reverb on it is quite interesting. But as it goes on, it's got to morph into something else. Because if that stays the most important thing the entire time, it's not going to sound that great. It's a guitar pluck from Contact. And this track is called Explore the Universe, if you must know. And you can watch me actually make it in the drum and bass series, which is kind of a cool deal. So if you're curious about how did I end up with all these automation clips. Now, automation clips, while we're on the subject, is they're either going to be sound design or they're going to be mixing. And a vast majority of them are mixing. We're interested in the way the balance shifts in this track. So if you look down here, I have some volume automation going on down here on the harmony vocal. And I've got some more on just the original vocal. Now, we haven't talked about panning yet. Panning will be coming, but it can make a mix sound so big, so much bigger. And something that's kind of boring is when a mix that does have stereo effects remain with the same consistent stereo effects. It's just not as interesting of a mix as something that moves a little bit. It's like it's living and breathing. I'm going to play for you this and just go ahead and give it a listen and see what you think of the way I structured the volume. Remember, this is a case of what you think is good, but at the same time, it's pretty easy to tell if something's dramatically wrong. So let's go ahead and just play it real quick. I'm going to play up to like right here-ish. So here we go.
Shooting stars fly by in the sky where you're meant to be. Gravity is chained to your core. Will you be free? Break the chain.
Okay, so that's what we got going on, right? And I'm quite happy with this. So one thing that I might change is the level of the pluck throughout this section, because if you're listening, the thing about a mix too, when I ask you to listen for something specifically, is sometimes things pop out at you that wouldn't pop out on a first listen, and so you begin to duck and do things that, like for example, if I get rid of this here, I think in this case it would be a fine move. So I'd come in here and put a little dip and volume right here so that you are extra focused on this section right here. But there's not a terribly large amount of stuff happening right there, so I can get away with having the pluck up. So, that's one of those things that I might try a couple different things and pick the one that I like the most as a result. You'll see here that I actually do some volume automation on this harmony to bring away the attention from the harmony and focus it on the original note, on the note that I think is the most, like, this is the critical note, right? This is the root note that I'm singing. So I want my attention shifted there, not so much on the harmony.
Break the chain.
And then for increased dramaticism, I increase the harmony as we get louder and louder and louder. So that plays to my advantage right there. The same thing goes for the vocal. I actually dip the vocal a little bit as we go. And some of this is also just because of the way the vocal was. And so I'm just smoothing it out according to what kind of curves that I thought were necessary to do so. And if I blow this up here, you can see the shape way more easily than down here. And you generally want to make a habit of working with automation clips that are a little larger, because when you're writing automation that's this small, sometimes the moves you're making are a lot bigger than you realize, such as for pan moves. Panning moves, this is actually a much more severe panning move than it originally looks. Now, we notice that this thing really begins to take a new form of importance as we get in here. And so just understanding that, hey, why this is going on, this is going to hand off. It's going to get louder and louder and louder. There's a point that if this were to continue at this level over here, I'm going to have to do something different, but it's going to hand off to this. And I tried to create little amounts of like handoffs, like little signatures, and we naturally crave these. For example, at a drop where the riser comes up and it goes bam, like it's like, oh, the thing just happened, and it makes sense. There's a natural volume movement that we associate with particular forms and structures. So that's this track, and it's just something you need to be aware of is doing these handoffs can be quite tricky and take some time. So when you're mixing, don't be afraid to volume automate and stuff. You'll also see there's a lot of filters going on here and some reverb levels moving around. That's because in my mix, you are seeing that I like to automate, as we talked about in the last one, these guys, because they are specifically for automation. But there's another way we can do things. We can do things with filters, and filters are sort of like volume knobs. Volume knobs like these will turn the entire signal down. If we open up a parametric EQ2, whoops, not that one, EQ2, and we take this one and bring it down, this is basically a volume knob. Up, down, up, down. But a filter can be much more exact in the way that we turn the volume up and down. So I prefer to use filters sometimes. They create effects that I enjoy and at the same time can control the volume, especially depending on the content of the source that I'm filtering. So I have filters all over the map that allow me to dynamically create interesting volume moves, but also shape the timbre of my track, the overtone structure of my track. So over here, you see I've got that going on. We have a reverb mix level change. And of course, when we're sending it through the reverb, when we'll talk about dimension in a mix a little bit later, but as we're sending it through the reverb, this is going to add to the volume. So by removing reverb, by mixing it out, we change the volume of a track, we change the importance, and we also change spatial characteristics in the track. That's another thing. However loud something is, if it's really loud, it tends to sound closer. This isn't always true, but if you hear a whisper that's really loud, it's like they're whispering right in your ear. So there's things like that. There are some examples where something that's really loud may actually sound very far away, depending on how you've done your reverb and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting deal. Now, you'll see here also that I have a couple things. Your send should be at unity pretty much all the time. You shouldn't be like mixing down your send to compensate for something. It should be at unity, because that you're going to be sending a bunch of stuff to there. So if you're turning down the reverb send to try and fix something else, that's not good. You should have your send at unity, and you should just change the amount that you're sending. You should just automate whatever this value is, like down here or whatever. You don't want to bring this down, because then if anything else is going to the send, such as this, you are going to have a problem. Whoops. And now that's that. On the topic of volume motions, we see that we have a number of them going, and that's what creates this smooth movement. You may also see in FL things that look like they're not being automated, but we've already talked about this. The volume knobs, I'm not always going to be using this guy to control. So for example, the thing going into channel 29 is some sort of an audio clip. If we come down here and look for it, here it is. If we click on it, I'm willing to bet that there's no way it's at unity, especially since it's a reverse crash. We open it up. Look at that. It's been mixed way down. So just because something looks at the beginning like it's at unity does not mean that that is at the actual level. In FL, things can be kind of encoded in a couple layers. So you want to be aware that there are other changes happening. I don't know what happened with this thing. That must have been interesting. Another thing that can happen is, and sometimes in clips, I will use the velocity to change the volume level. Sometimes different velocities will do different things, such as change samples instead of change the volume level of a sample. Sometimes it does both. The samples will not only change, but they'll be naturally softer samples. Whereas in this guitar library, for example, this one, as you change velocity levels, it doesn't necessarily get softer. It does have a natural loudness that gets to it, but it changes the sample that is being triggered in a way that's not necessarily 100% correspondent to the volume of that sample. Contact does some interesting things when you drop stuff in it too. So anyways, what I'm saying is there's a bunch of different ways to get at this problem and a bunch of different places you can use to change this. And in some cases, the way you change the volume can matter. For example, in Contact, if you trigger samples and then use your fader to change it, you're going to be changing the level of those samples versus if you change the volume velocity using velocity or expressiveness or whatever, there may be dynamic sample scripting going on that actually changes the samples that are being triggered to give you a more realistic performance of what that instrument would probably sound like or should sound like. Probably, I don't know. They're aiming to sound like something, and Contact does everything it really can as a sampler to try and get the most out of that performance and make it sound the most like that actual instrument. So changing this may not always be the wisest move. You may go into Contact. So that's that. Balance is really important in a mix. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.